All right, and we're back. Thank you everyone for coming back to us. And now we have an excellent panel, which is going to be about the role of data in digital transformation. Tom is going to be our moderator and introduce the rest of our panelists. Tom, take it away.
Thanks, Remy. I want to welcome everyone to our panel today. As Remy said, we're going to discuss the data's role in digital transformation. And I'm Tom O'Brien, the Managing Director at Caserta, and I'll be your host for the panel today. And to my delight, we have assembled three very talented experts as our panelists today. There's Jesse Santos, who's the Managing Director for the Alpha Platform Management at State Street Financial. We have Anand Sahasram, who's the Chief Data Officer at Dodge & Cox. And we have our own Danny Siegel, who's the Chief Operating Officer at Caserta. So gentlemen, I just wanted to give a quick brief overview of your role and your background and for the audience. And Jesse, can I start with you?
Absolutely, Tom. Nice to meet everybody. Happy to be here. My role currently as head of Alpha Platform Product Management for State Street is a global role covering all aspects of front, middle, and back office investment data management on behalf of clients. It's a servicing platform, which is very data intensive from the time an investment manager decides to make a trade all the way through to the settlement, custody, and the reporting through all of the various verticals, if you will, that an investment manager has to do during the course of a business day. Prior to that, I was a global head of data and analytics at BNY Mellon Investment Management, $2.1 trillion asset manager. That's where I met Joe and the Caserta team, actually. And prior to that, multiple projects consulting across data transformation efforts in the investment management industry. So a lot to talk about in terms of data and experiences with managing data through these transformations.
Thank you, Jesse. I know you're traveling to London. Thanks so much for joining us today. Anand, I'll turn it over to you if you can give your background and your role.
Thanks, Tom. Actually, I've had the pleasure of knowing Joe Caserta for quite a while now. This was back to my days at McKinsey. Currently, I am Chief Data Officer at Dodge & Cox. We are a investment manager based out of San Francisco, and my responsibilities really cut across all of the aspects relating to data and analytics, from investment modeling to how we actually source data for our investment decisions and operations, as well as back office settlement. And in fact, we're working with Jesse and his team on State Street initiatives as well. Just prior to this, I mean, my background has really been all financial services. I was CTO at S&P Global. And prior to that, at Morgan Stanley, I was in the data and analytics space. Happy to be here.
We're happy to have you, Anand. And now you're traveling too. Thanks for taking the time out today. And I'm going to turn it over to my good friend, Danny Siegel.
Thanks, Tom. And as Tom said, I'm COO of Caserta Concepts, and that involves, of course, everything from managing all the consultants and accountability for all of our consulting delivery. I'm an old hat, 30-year veteran in the data industry myself, largely in the consumer product space and pharmaceuticals. So a contemporary of the two gentlemen to my right and just below me here, the way I'm looking at it. So pleasure to be here.
Yeah, you know, Danny, while I have you, I think it's important to set the stage here. And I wanted to ask you this question. Now, digital transformation definitely means different things to different people.
Yeah.
And I was wondering what you see as the potential scope of work from a data perspective in digital transformation. Just take a moment for the audience and give your perspective.
Well, I think, so to your first point, Tom, I think I'd probably start with just a quick definition of scope of what we're talking about, right? Digital is kind of a catch-all term, which can mean everything from, I think, kind of a classic digital transformation. People think about the internet or device-based face of an enterprise, e-com, marketing, et cetera. That's perhaps one end of the spectrum, but that can go all the way to the other end, which is, digital, meaning re-implementation of internal operational systems like ERP or supply chain planning or what have you, financial systems, and inclusive, probably on that spectrum somewhere, would be all of the internal operating systems of any company, whether it's an HR system, T&E systems, et cetera, but things that companies could conceivably refer to as digital. So those are two, I would just say, wide ends of the spectrum. I guess we're just jumping straight into your question though, Tom, in the interest of time, what does data mean to that? I think I'd prefer to approach it from the opposite angle. If you don't consider data as part as a fundamental consideration, by definition, if you're digitizing something, you're going to create data. I think we'd all agree on that. So if you're creating data and you don't have a really a strategy and a deep understanding of how you're going to capture it, analyze it, and sorry about that, and actually turn it into value, you're going to struggle to actually realize the benefit of the digital transformation. Sure, you'll have a new system, but I think you'll be leaving a whole lot on the table.
Thanks, Danny. The next question I'd like to pose to all of you, I think it's one that we're all interested in hearing from you about. It's here's the question that I have. What do you believe, each one of you, from your perspective, the three most important aspects of data's role in digital transformation? Jesse, can I start with you, please?
Yeah, absolutely. So, in my specific industry, I'd like to stay in that space for a minute, because for us, data has a few different meanings, obviously, as Tom and Danny have already covered. But to us, there's the first principle, which is we have to get the numbers exactly right for our clients. And we manage a very high volume of data, not as many as our contemporaries in the consumer goods space and other areas of the economy where volumes of data would dwarf what we deal with. But we have to get the numbers right every day for our clients. So we consider that to be source of truth. And when we go through these transformational initiatives, right, we have to keep a pulse on that truth, right, while changing the way that data moves through our operating systems, while changing the way that our data and our clients' data move through their operating systems. There's always this touch point with the source of truth. So I think the biggest one is establishing a relationship between your future state and your current state in order to keep the data aligned and consistent. And then subsequently, if you have that alignment, in the first case, the second important thing is to make sure that you're tracking the progress that you're making, right? So having established metrics that you're constantly trying to improve on, and stating those metrics up front as you're progressing through this transformation. In our case, we're a services platform, so we're trying to always improve the way that we manage this data, fewer errors, faster time to the client, meeting SLAs, and then tracking that, right? Setting those goals up front through this transformation. Otherwise, you have this endless, never satisfied project where your employees, the resources that are working through this, aren't getting the wins because there's constantly improvement, the constant improvement throughout these transformational efforts. So you want to establish those metrics, you want to measure them, you want to always on a regular cadence celebrate those wins that when you hit those metrics, right, and revert back to making sure the numbers are right. Those are really the three most critical things in my view. Remembering where your source of truth is, managing through technology innovation, and then constantly checking back to the progress and the metrics in a regular cadence.
Thanks, Jesse. That was very thoughtful and insightful. Danny, what are your thoughts on it?
So, I mean, I think I guess I touched on it a little bit already, Tom, but I think just to expand a little bit on what Jesse was saying. First of all, financial services is a really interesting example, like other types of industries where data is the product in some sense. Like Jesse said, if the numbers are imprecise by a penny, it's not good enough, right? Quality is fundamental. I think in digital transformations, we look at data has to become, I think of data as being almost the inception point, saying to the organization, how do we intend strategically, what's the business strategy, and how will data inform it such that we're going to get the value out of this? Then you think about the digital assets you need to change to either serve as sensors to capture the necessary data, putting in the right kind of governance and thinking about governance early on, and quality, obviously, to make sure you're capturing it in a way that it's going to deliver the value, right? Bad data in, bad data out. And I think there's an HR component or a skills component is evaluating the enterprise from a data perspective and just saying, is this organization ready to, just because we're improving ourselves from a digital perspective, our digital assets are improving, do we have the right kind of skill set to take advantage of it? So I think, those are some fundamental pieces, some building blocks, some bricks, if you will, that underlie the concept of how to think about data when getting into a digital transformation.
Yeah, thanks, Danny. That was good. Very good. Anand, what are your thoughts around that?
Yeah, I mean, I agree with everything that was said. I mean, in addition, I believe that the executive sponsorship aspect is actually quite important for digital transformation. I think that certainly the C-suite and the heads of who are kind of sponsoring some of these initiatives and aligning those with the goals of what the business wants to accomplish, that alignment has to be there, and that sponsorship has to be there right from the get-go. So that's something that I've found to be very useful in my roles that I've done, which have always involved some type of digital transformation, is to ensure that the executives of all of the departments are really on the same page. Sometimes we actually form this committee that really continues to talk about and learn about digital transformation and the impact it's really having on the business. So that's something that I believe is critical. The second piece is certainly, as some of the other panelists, both Jesse and Danny, have touched upon, is really prioritization. Is digital transformation is obviously a lot of things to different people, as Danny mentioned. And a lot of people tend to start with the customer experience, right? So because that's essentially what defines you as a company. And, certainly as Jesse mentioned, there's a lot of clients, who are impacted by, the how digital transformation happens. So that to me is really almost the front runner, if you will, in terms of the digital transformation. But if you don't think about the back office and the operations, and the term that's used in financial services is the straight through processing and the automation that happens, then it can be a very kind of clunky and choppy experience, no matter how well you actually have your website or your app and things of that nature. So it is really important, I think, for people to think through this process from an end-to-end perspective, re-engineering that process, automating it, and digitizing it. So to me, that's really kind of the crux of how to set priorities and how to bring senior management on board, in addition to obviously some of the great points that the other panelists have made.
And you touched on a lot of good points there, Anand. I think, as we all know, the executive commitment to the data aspects of the digital transformation are critical. And you touched on that. It sounds like you have a good strategy going on accomplishing that. I'm going to go on to the next question, if I could. How important do you guys think is IT and the business align on digital transformation, the alignment? And what are your thoughts around that? And Anand, I'm going to go right back to you on that one.
Okay, great, thanks. I mean, it's kind of touched upon that topic, I think it's crucial, the IT and business alignment. I mean, in some instances, I have seen companies kind of look at digital transformation as a IT-driven effort, right? I mean, I think that is misplaced to some degree. I think it really needs to be a partnership with the business heads really thinking about their business process, how that's going to be impacted, how that's going to be more operationally efficient, and how that's going to better serve the goals of the department and the organization. So to me, this is really about end-to-end business process reengineering and automation. And that has the impact all around from a digital perspective, whether that, and obviously there's a number of ways to kind of achieve this to really make sure that the goals of the company and the department are actually stated in that fashion, where digital becomes part of the vernacular, the culture, the lingo of the company. And obviously then that translates into technology capabilities. I think Danny, specifically touched upon the skill set, if I'm not mistaken, and that to me is an important aspect because it's not just one skill set, it's multiple skill sets that get involved in an entire digital transformation.
Thank you very much, Anand. Jesse, anything to add on that, on your thoughts around the alignment of IT and business on the digital transformation?
I do. You know, when I've researched and written about the role of the chief data officer, and especially in the financial services and investment management industry, and I feel strongly that the role is the linkage between the business and technology in a lot of cases. In some cases, right, the chief data officer is a business line in and of itself. In some cases, like driving revenue or creating, you know, the workspaces and the like, and becomes a business line. But you know, what I find is the most effective chief data officers, you know, in Anand's profile, if you will, with having been CTO and on the business side, is bringing those groups together and then making the decision, being the decision maker across things. Because you know, sometimes what I found is, you know, the technology side wants to over-engineer something. No offense to the technologists on the call. And at the same time, the business tends to, you know, oversimplify, if you will, some of the things they want to do, right? Like make it faster, make it cheaper. You know, I can't afford to do this anymore. Things like that, where, you know, if you don't have a translator to sit between the two and make decisions around priorities, you tend to end up with either something the business doesn't like, or subsequently, you know, something that doesn't challenge the technologists enough to care about it, to you know, to put the time and effort in. So I look at the role of the chief data officer in that question, and I think about, you know, that translation layer across the business and technology teams to help with the priorities and to set the vision, and then to, you know, subsequently execute on that.
Thank you, Jesse. Here's my next question. Anand, I'm going to go right back to you if you don't mind. How is your company organized now to support digital and data transformation holistically? And what do you think the pros and cons of doing so is?
I mean, it's a great question. I think, I mean, and certainly I've kind of been in a few of these types of organizations and situations. So I think the organization to support a digital transformation tends to really vary widely across the spectrum. So in some cases, you actually have the concept of a chief digital officer, or as Jesse mentioned, you know, somebody in my role, a chief data officer, would actually end up playing that type of role where they are actually looking at the connectivity between the business initiatives and what technology is looking to do, and where does digital transformation really have an impact, and how should we be accomplishing that. In other cases, it's really more of a distributed role, right? So, I mean, I've actually seen situations where you actually have somebody embedded in each of the organizations or departments or divisions, really focusing on what their digital priorities are. So I think the organization structure tends to vary, you know, in terms of, you know, how to accomplish some of these end goals. But at the end of the day, there has to be consistent and persistent focus on kind of making sure that we can measure the impact of where we are going from a digital perspective. I think Jesse mentioned this earlier, that to me, metrics are absolutely crucial to say, have we meaningfully progressed from last year to this year? And how do we measure that? I mean, let's think about the metrics that kind of measure us from that perspective, not just from a customer experience perspective, but also what goes on inside the company as well, in many ways.
Thank you, Anand. Danny, with your background in doing this work now, what are your thoughts around that?
Well, I think so. One thing I'd want to comment on Anand said, I think, which is really a really great observation on, is the organizations that have a CDO, regardless of where that CDO sits, without at least an echo of that role in the business lines, it's an acknowledgement that they're in the early stages of the transformation, of starting to get themselves thinking with more of a data mindset. But once that role has been distributed, and that sort of responsibility, accountability, and value has been shared around the organization, you're probably in the early days. That's the one thing I'd say. With the CDO role, I think, and I'll expand on this a little bit. I should say the organizations where the technology organization is very business aligned can end up very effectively leading the charge in digital, right? Because they have close partnerships, they understand the business needs, they understand the business processes, and they understand the value and the priorities they're delivering against. Other organizations, technology is a little bit lagging in terms of they're very focused on the technology. In those cases, CDO can be really effective in starting to create that bridge. And digital transformations are very business driven, right? And that isn't to say that IT doesn't perform an incredibly important role, but the sort of, I think the organization governing it, it's like a Venn diagram, right? You have some overlap, but depending on who's closer to the business and the technology, you might see different groups of people driving the leadership of a digital transformation. But the important part is, it is a priority of businesses and strategy informed by technology and enabled by technology. So as long as those two are closely represented in the leadership of the transformation, you're in good shape. You're going in the right direction.
Great, thank you. Here's a question that we all grapple with and investigate and research and make decisions on. It's this: what types of new tools are making the process of data transformation easier, quicker, and simpler? And Anand, can I throw that one to you to start?
Yeah, absolutely. Certainly, I think we've talked at length about data being at the heart of digital transformation. So there's really, a number of tools. I mean, we, for example, are kind of moving all our data assets to the cloud. And that involves a whole new set of tools and capabilities and skills that are associated with that. What I also find is, just connecting it to things that happen within the organization, enabling business processes, ensuring that we can automate some of those business processes. I mean, I have a background also working with BPM software, which typically can be quite large and complex to kind of implement and sometimes expensive. And that is more targeted towards very complex business processes, right? So if you're automating at a large bank, let's say you're automating a client onboarding process, you sometimes have extremely complex steps that are associated with it. So there's something like BPM really helps. I've now seen the trend towards kind of low code automation platforms also, because people are kind of embracing this concept of being agile and delivering value to the business without necessarily writing, a lot of code or making it a 6-month technology project. So that's something else that is really an emerging space. And, certainly you have a number of companies there that are really, bridging the space between BPM, low code, and as well as business process automation, right?
Thank you, Anand. Jesse, what are your thoughts around the tools?
Yeah, so I'm a huge nerd when it comes to the tooling, and diving into the, all the different various, I think of it like the Silicon Valley show, all the logos that pop up at the beginning. I was trying to figure out what the newest stuff is. But when I think about this question, I think about it from the bottom up, like from architecture and the cloud and what that's made available to us as technologists and as problem solvers. Now we have, shared utilities that can speak across multiple applications. We can, the concept of managing complex workflows through message streams. Kafka comes to mind, or something that's really made a huge impact in our technology stack. And that alone, isn't enough. There's so many other utilities that the cloud offers. And as we start to progress through, we look at each component that we're building out on our enterprise platform to manage firms like Anand, help them manage it. We're constantly coming up against legacy technology assets of ours that were built over the years and have heavy footprints in our current data centers, and thinking about how we're going to transfer those and either maintain them on the cloud, cut them up into smaller services bits, or evaluate potential partners. Mergers and acquisitions is another part of my role. We're looking at acquisitions of smaller, more nimble companies that have applications that honestly, would have taken years to perfect back when I started this business, and now, are built in a matter of months and are very flexible and scalable, which are really exciting. And then, and most of them are built now cloud native. So, when we introduce tools to start to interconnect these things and start to have them speak to each other and automate, we're finding it much easier to do that. There's an execution layer to all this, right? It's not like it just happens, but there's the tools are there, and the conversations that we're having now are extremely exciting around these tools and the what's possible. So constantly innovating, and I'd say my biggest challenge with all of it is trying to keep pace with all the new stuff that's coming out. So you have to really dedicate some time during your week to step away and stay current. So but very exciting stuff.
Yeah, thanks, Jesse. Danny, what do you think?
I won't belabor the cloud point. I think anyone on the call today who's opened a web browser in the last 2 years knows that the cloud is a great way to reduce costs and improve performance and so forth. I think the nice thing about the tooling is twofold. One, it's becoming dramatically more automated. If you watched Joe this morning earlier talk about sort of a little bit of a future look at where the data industry is going, the history of, or the legacy of going through humans observing data, humans categorizing it, humans integrating it, slowly but surely, that is becoming a reality that is slowly automating or becoming, let's just say, becoming highly instrumented. The other thing about the tooling that's really novel and exciting right now is, even 4 or 5 years ago, surprisingly, we were in a place where we had, these big monolithic programs where you'd start with an energy to create a data platform, and 9 months, a year later, somebody would come out from behind the curtain, voila, does it meet your requirements kind of thing. That has dramatically changed. Value is starting to get realized from day one on some of these platforms. That partnership between the business and the technologists who are delivering on this, the promise becomes quite clear quite early and often, and iteratively throughout the process. So the tooling has really matured and started to meet, I think, the consumers of the data, consumers of the insights, where they are.
Thanks, David. We only have 1 minute left, but if we could fit it in, Anand, what's something that organizations should avoid on this journey? If you could quickly answer that one. I know it's a long, it's a tough thing to answer in a short time.
Yeah, I think short-term thinking would be my answer. just because, you know, something doesn't work right the first time or fails, it doesn't mean that automation or digitization cannot be done. I think people have to just persist, right? I mean, I've myself been through journeys where you kind of try something and you have to try it again with a whole different look because, you know, something didn't go right the first time.
Yeah, thank you, Anand. Lessons learned on every initiative, right? So listen, we're at the end of our panel discussion, and I want to thank this terrific panel that we've had, Jesse, Anand, and Danny. You know, you shared your thoughts and your knowledge with us today, and you definitely made us smarter on this journey. So thank you so much. And Remy, I'll turn it over to you.